As a devotee of Thoth, I believe in the power of the word, and it can be said that learning any discipline is learning about its definitions. So let's learn a little bit about how we talk in Emergent Magick. So this is the second video in our series on the Emergent Magick book, going chapter by chapter. And there's some other things in the introduction, but I think the most important part there is our definitions, how we define things in Emergent Magick. Once again, you're going to notice that we take a lot from chaos magic here, and that's intentional. One thing I've always said is the greatest gift that chaos magic ever gave to the world is that it gave us a universal language to talk about magic that cuts across different traditions and paradigms and makes it easier for people from different perspectives to communicate about a subject that is really essential to so many of those traditions. The second thing about this video is that we're going to start off going over those basic definitions that are descended to us from chaos magic. And then later on, I'll get into some more Emergent Magick specific stuff and where we're looking to make changes. One of the coolest things chaos magic does is breaks down different types of magical operations by their methodology and their purpose. And you can see how these things exist in multiple traditions. They can look a lot different, from voodoo to witchcraft to ceremonial magic, but there's certainly commonalities there that they all share. The first one I'm going to cover is Invocation. It's one of my favorites, and it's something that's very often used in rituals with the Order of Emergent Magi. Invocation is the act of bringing into oneself a spirit or concept, even an archetype. It works across models of magic because you can say that the spiritual entity is real, that this is an actual being that's you're calling into yourself, or you can consider it a psychological change. That doesn't really matter, because in the end, what matters is the purpose of invocation. Invocation is usually used to give a magician agency or authority, that I have the power to do this magic because I have this inside of me. In this respect, invocation is often used as a prelude to other types of magic, as in rituals where a spirit is invoked and then the other participants ask questions, so then it becomes an act of divination. It can also become an act of enchantment, as the magician, who is now split, asks the being that's inhabiting them to perform work in the physical world. Invocation often gets confused with the second type of magic on our list, Evocation. And Evocation is calling a spirit, concept, or being outside of yourself, calling it to be present for the purpose of communication. And communication is the essence of evocation, even if it's not in words, even if it's extremely vague. To call up another being and try to communicate with it is the essence of evocation. Once again, it could be used as a prelude to other types of magic, such as divination and illumination. But that's the difference between the two. Invocation is calling a being into oneself. Evocation is calling a being outside oneself. And even if it's not a physical manifestation, it's calling on that being's presence for the purpose of communication. Next up, Divination, which I've already mentioned a couple times. Divination is the act of receiving knowledge that one would not otherwise have due to confines of time and space. Tarot cards, rune stones, scrying in a mirror, these are all good examples of this. And with these, the Magus can see the future, the past, the present, and other places. Divination is something that a Magus should use often. If you have a question about where you should be going with your magic, what's the next magical operation that you should be doing, divination is a good place to turn. Next on my list, transformation, the act of changing oneself. This seems like a fairly modern approach to magic. Magic as self-help, magic as self-improvement, but that's not necessarily so. As I touched on in my video, The Threads of the Western Esoteric Tradition, transformation has been a huge part of the mystery tradition for a very long time. And one can obviously see the usefulness in this type of magic, as we all have things in our life that we wish we could do better, things that we want to improve on ourselves, and this goes from the physical to the metaphysical. Transformation runs a gambit from simply using it as a stop smoking technique to engaging in forms of lycanthropy to explore the animalistic sides of our nature. If you want to make changes to the physical world outside oneself, then you're talking about enchantment, which is basically the Magus using their own force of will to change the world around them. The best example of this being sigil magic, where a symbol is created and then given some type of power and released into the world to make changes. And chaos magic is pretty big on enchantment, and Peter Carroll kind of says that this is the best form of magic to go with. I'm not so certain, because I believe beating one's will against the universe usually doesn't produce results. Not everyone's going to win the lottery just because they wish for it. Last on the list of these different types of magic is illumination. Illumination can be a little bit tricky. It seems very close to divination in that it is about receiving knowledge. It's also similar to transformation in that knowledge changes a person when they receive it. Ultimately, this is talking about mystery. It's about learning the inner workings of the universe in order to transcend. I hope those concepts give you something to think about in your own magic. Once again, it's one of those things where not everything is going to fit into one neat little category. Things are going to overlap. And one shouldn't look to say, I'm only going to do enchantment, or I'm only going to do divination. Magic is always a mix of these things. And now I want to talk about some words and concepts that are specific to the Order of Emergent Magi and Emergent Magick in general, just so you have a better understanding of what I'm talking about later on in the future videos on this subject. The first thing I'm going to cover is an important metaphor that we use in Emergent Magick that kind of has dual purposes. And that is the concept of the Citadel of Emergent Magick. In a concrete sense, the Citadel of Emergent Magick is the final exercise of Liber F, which is our recommended magical training program, where the Magus essentially creates a mind palace that represents different symbols and different aspects of their personal tradition. They fill this imaginative world with all the things that go into their magic. It's a form of meditation, and it's a way of doing magic astrally as well. In another sense, the Citadel of Emergent Magick speaks to an individual's tradition. It is a magus's foundational beliefs. And you can think of this kind of as having theories that you're constantly working on trying to improve. And some of these foundational beliefs may change, but only after considerable work and only after it's informed by the magic that you have done. Everyone has to have a place to start, and that's what the Citadel of Emergent Magick is. And it may be a place that you defend, but you should never be beholden to it. Another thing that we use in Emergent Magick that might need some clarification is how we use the word sacrament. Now, everyone has a general idea of what a sacrament is, and at its base, it's simply making something sacred and imbibing it in a ritual context. But when the Order of Emergent Magi talk about sacrament, it's almost guaranteed that we're talking about a psychedelic substance. And we call it a sacrament because it is best treated that way. In countless studies where psychedelics have been used in research, it's always been found that when it is presented in a ritualistic context, the person taking it has better results. So while you may use substances in your work, we absolutely recommend that it's something that you keep sacred. Another thing you're going to hear me talk about a lot is the Sabbat. And, in a general sense, a Sabbat is simply the word we use for a gathering of practitioners of Emergent Magick. But our Sabbats have a unique character to them that's important to understand. They're usually a weekend-long affair, they run multiple days, and it's part spiritual experience and part party, and that's intentional. They are there to create bonds, social bonds between members, emotional bonds. And at these Sabbats, everyone is invited to present a ritual to the group, and those rituals are to be respected by all members who participate. The Sabbat is really central to the experience of Emergent Magick, and I'll be doing an entire video on how to host a Sabbat and run one successfully. As I said in part 1 on Emergent Magick, I also want to talk about some changes that will be coming in the second edition of the book. And one of those changes is how we approach the concept of gnosis, and if the word gnosis itself is really serving us in the way that it should. So I'm going to start by reading for you the definition of gnosis from Liber Null and Psychonaut. Altered states of consciousness are the key to magical powers. The particular state of mind required has a name in every tradition. No mind, stopping the internal dialogue, passing through the eye of the needle, ain, or nothing, or samdi, or one-pointedness. In this book, it will be known as gnosis. It is an extension of the magical trance by other means. Now that's all fine and good in a general sense, but there's some particulars that we've kind of taken exception to, especially with the idea that the purpose is to achieve a state of no mind. I don't think that really applies to all forms of magic. It certainly doesn't apply to all traditions. Also take some exceptions to how Peter Carroll equates gnosis later on to some kind of power level. He creates equations that say that the success of any magical operation is dependent on how much gnosis is put into it, almost turning magic into a video game. And frankly, that hasn't been my experience. I've had magical operations that were casual, almost flippant, that have created great results, and others that had rituals with high states of altered consciousness, which did very little. So ultimately what we're talking about is creating altered states of consciousness. We definitely agree that magic lies in turning off that default mode being and entering into a different state, and that's necessary for the performance of magic. But is it really about achieving no mind, and is it something that can be quantified? And that's why we're moving towards a different word to describe this phenomena, the word lumen, which is a Latin word which means an opening. I think it better describes the process that we're trying to convey, that what is necessary for magic is to create directed states of altered consciousness for the purpose of doing magic, to create an opening for which magic is performed. Well, I hope you enjoyed that one, and hope it sets us up for when we get into more of the meat of the Emergent Magick book. Once again, I'm begging you, like and subscribe, help this channel grow. Also, don't forget about our Ko-Fi campaign. We're going to Egypt in November. That's a thing that's happening. And I'd really like to be able to bring you back footage and show you Egypt from a mage's perspective. That's going to require equipment and permits. So we're starting to collect some donations. And the more you give, the better you're going to get on this channel. We also have our Redbubble store where you can get t-shirts with our merchandise and some other stuff. Once again, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.